So, introducing our final speaker for this session, Howard Williams, Professor of Archaeology here at University of Chester, and no further introduction needed.
Thank you very much, Ed. Hello, everybody. I'm really delighted to be able to talk about a project that will involve myself, Caroline Pudney, who you've already heard from but not been able to meet today. And so it's a project that's ongoing. And we're calling it Arty-ology. And as you see, much of this is being driven by our students. So I hope to talk about this. This is the abstract, so I put this here to remind myself. And I want to just grab some pictures that other people have shared with us yesterday to make the point that artistic reconstructions are such an integral part of our toolkit of any kind of archaeological work nowadays, from field investigations of sites, monuments, landscapes, heritage sites and museums. Almost any kind of project we benefit from previous generations of and ongoing creative interactions with the archaeological process. And I think that was really been shown in this conference yesterday, both in the exhibition and in some of the talks. And sorry, Richard, I just talked John Squogger's Anglesey Ling Kerigbach image here as an example. And it's something I've been contending with in my work on mortuary archaeology over the years, perhaps not the thing I'm best known for, but that I've tried to tackle the many potentials and pitfalls, the way in which artists and museum models, reconstructions, dioramas, all these different ways in which we visualize mortuary context, including the artifacts placed with them. So this is a thing I've been contending with, and also doing projects trying to work with people who actually have artistic talent, which I lack, in this case with John Swogger, trying to visualise through the city and suburb of Wrexham the most enigmatic of our major linear earthworks, in my opinion, Watts Dyke. So we did a project called Watts Dyke. And also thinking about other ways in which art interacts with archaeology in unsuspecting ways. And to give you an example of this, I have in publication now declared, so it must be true, that the funeral of the hero / anti-hero V in the Moore and Lloyd V for Vendetta comic and then the McTeague film is perhaps our best, least known Norse or Viking funeral. And this has implications for how Viking Age mortuary archaeology interacts with popular culture, but also I contend it's a model for how we think about robustly combating misinformation and disinformation about the past and its manipulation in the present day. But that's for another story. But that's to give you some groundwork for how we come to this project, because over the last decade, we have tried through our final year undergraduate module, Archaeology in Contemporary Society, to create projects that get students thinking about what is public archaeology? How do we engage with the public? And we have done this by creating conferences and then exhibitions with three simultaneous aims: to educate the students as an integral part of their undergraduate degrees of public archaeology, and to have an experience of how to educate and engage. And that's absolutely central to the university's citizen-student strategy of thinking about the responsibilities of learning and education in the world. To get the students to produce a co-produced public event. So the students do the work, design the project, and then to do so, but focusing down on a particular cutting-edge academic debate in public archaeology that then feeds into our now new MA in public archaeology. So it's about thinking about how the students can be engaging in critical research questions through an event, through an exhibition, through a conference, and thinking about their place in society. And so we ran 6 University of Chester archaeology student conferences from 2016 to 2021, 5 in person, then 1 understandably due to the COVID pandemic lockdowns online, where the students designed the theme, designed the logo, designed the poster, and we got keynote speakers as well as the students in this room for 5 of them. Free public day conference, so it's for everyone. We advertised it as best we could and got the room reasonably full of students' friends, students' families, but also Chester Archaeological Society, always there to support and promote and participate. And so many other regional, and some people came a long distance to attend the debates. So here's me with Dr. Adrian Maldonado and Dr. Chiara Bonacci of both actually from Scotland. I hadn't made the connection there. Yes, so both from Scotland, NMS and University of Edinburgh now, for one of the conferences, to give you that sense of these events that tackle a critical theme on how archaeology intersects with the media. And this led to a series of academic books in which involved the students as authors, the students as editors, in other words, co-produced on public archaeology, including looking at the public archaeology of death, digging into the Dark Ages, looking at early medieval public archaeologies of frontiers and borderlands, and the last one, the public archaeology of treasure. And I skip over one more, which I'm going to talk about, and I've got here, because it was produced with student Afnan Ezeldin and Caroline. And that's Public Archaeology Arts of Engagement, which you can download for free from the ArchaeoPress website, as well as get a copy. And the idea of this book, this was the first one done with ArchaeoPress, and it's open access, and it has 3 big sections. One that thinks about art and of engagement as strategies, skills, in skilled ways in which we as practitioners engage communities, whether it's on an open day through to a website, the strategies of digital engagement. And then particularly, forgive the typo there, digital and visual media, how we use vlogs, blogs, social media to do that work. So thinking about that as not an add-on, but an integral part of how we do public archaeology. And the third section of the book looked at art as public archaeology. And I know this will interest some people in this room very much, about how the creative process of collaboration with artists or participating in artistic endeavours oneself can be important in the field, in the museum, in the lecture theatre, to engage people. And so this was the theme that we picked up again recently. But I do want to flag up that Caroline, those were sort of my area, but Caroline picked up the baton when I realised that I just couldn't sustain editing a book a year of such complexity of working with students. It was really good, but incredibly exhausting. So she picked up the baton in 2022, and working with Liz Montgomery and this museum has produced a series of annual exhibitions with students. So here's the one from 2024, Royal Rumble, Chester and the English Civil War, using the collections, getting the students to think about a particular theme and how we communicate the message of those collections in new ways. And that led to the UOC Student Conference exhibition of 2025, which was designed and directed by Caroline and supported by Liz Montgomery here. And the students had to the task they were given for this particular project in that particular final year module was to re-envision the Grosvenor Museum's collections, to critique an existing archaeological reconstruction in the Grosvenor Museum's collections, a painting, a model, a diorama, to create an alternative reconstruction with a label using generative AI, prompts necessary but no artistic talents required. That was the idea. So there was a level playing field. So it wasn't trying to test the students' ability to draw or to create a sophisticated piece of pottery, or whatever it may be. It was not about that. It was about but then also to critique the AI itself and how it has its own strengths and limitations, and to place this in the context of effective and problematic aspects of archaeological reconstructions, and to foster and promote teaching and learning and research partnerships with West Cheshire Museums here, the Grosvenor Museum, because we've got this long, sustained relationship, and to create an overarching narrative and link to a title for the exhibition. So they had to work together, not only do their individual work, but to come together to produce an exhibition. And then they all rebelled, which is interesting. And I think look, we learned from this too. And I think the students were right, mainly is what the result of this is. Many objected to using generative AI on ethical and environmental grounds, telling us that AI is destroying creativity, stealing ideas and jobs, and perpetuating, if not enhancing, climate change. And we went, okay. So we discussed with the students and adapted the task. So the students had the option of using generative AI or creating their own original art to complete the task, which was something I'd hoped to avoid because I didn't want to even indirectly have students' confidence and capacity affected so that those that simply are good at drawing get better marks. That wasn't the point. But they wanted that, and that's fine. And I share the concerns both within the higher education sector and our wider society about this absolute drive to have AI imposed upon us. And my own institution is being complicit at every level in that same UKHE drive to enhance and include AI without many critical discussions. But there we are. So the results, well, the idea wasn't them to create perfect new ideas for how to reconstruct, tell the stories from artefacts in the museum's collections, but they came up with a theme, Arty-ology, and I want to share 7 examples. There's a few over here. And all of them tried different things and in different ways, I think, achieved exceptional results. The idea was not to come up with a solution, but to tackle the problem. So you can think of these posters of each individual students produced as sort of drafts, as sort of suggestions, proposals. So Joseph Roberts, for example, critiqued representations of Roman urban space, particularly thinking about the decline of Roman towns and thinking about post-Roman towns. So many of our Roman models show a town at its hiatus or a villa at its height, the one image. And so he was very interested and captivated by an existing single image by Astley and Beckett of early medieval Chester, with the ruins of Roman Chester, perhaps as it may have been in the 10th century as Athelflaed and Burr. And he wanted to see what AI could do. And a surprise, AI struggled. And so you have this disastrous attempt at, I managed to turn something off, of creating, sort of looks like a Tudor scene with massive, it was just, he tried hard, but AI just wasn't going to play ball with what the software he was using, the sites he was using. And that, I think, is instructive. Charlie Lawton-Lay couldn't find a street scene from Chester, so we gave him the chance to use Ivan Lapper's Roman street scene for Wroxeter, but because his vision was, I think, really distinctive. What he wanted to do was try and think about how people on the autism spectrum would be perceiving this kind of art and how we can adapt it with colour contrasts and refinements to perhaps help convey the same information, but perhaps through a different audience. In particular, the vibrancy and contrast of colours was one of the things that he wanted to discuss. So he sort of works with an existing artist's work and takes away that drab sort of, what they call it in modern pop culture, something, the medieval wash, isn't it? The medieval, give people bright colours, but then dampen it all down. And I think Roman artists less so, but there's the same pattern. So he wanted to make more vibrant the colours to help communicate the message. So it's not that this is a final solution or final resolution to the problem, but he's critiquing and adapting. Estlin Silcox critiqued the problems with creating holes from fragments for displays and explored the potential of 3D scanning to do alternative ways of putting fragments into holes that can be handled and can come out of the display cases. Daniel Cameron thought about narratives and how do we create narratives from objects that are in display cases. So he was thinking about the Grosvenor Museum's display of Roman amphora and thinking about how can we create a comic strip artifact biography. So his art is better than mine, but it may need improvement if you were going to take this further. But the point isn't that this is a final result. It's about showing that he's critiqued the traditional displays and come up with an alternative on his own. These are all the students' ideas. Obviously, we gave them feedback and input, but they came up with this design. So, Life of a Roman Amphora, and it's a bit difficult to spot, but it's sort of being produced, being transported, being used, and then finally being. I think it's being actually sort of. I don't know what's actually going on at the end there. Something's happening with it anyway. I can't remember. It's too small to see. Niamh Gillett was very interested. She actually did two things for one. She was trying to think about critiquing traditional displays of Roman gaming pieces. And so what she ended up doing was modelling a tabular board and then creating a little sort of visual scene of people playing the game and the camaraderie, but also the intensity and the fun all mixed in together. So trying to put the fragments back into a narrative scene. So that's her draft image, and that's her final one for the exhibition, and that's the final exhibition on show in the Grosvenor Museum. So she's trying to sort of help find new ways of interpreting using artistic approaches. Roxanne Petrou, who's gone on to, she's studying journalism now to another university, but she was interested in critiquing Roman footwear and hobnail boots, and how do we move from that sort of that lifeless image or static object to a more narrative. And again, she tried a more sort of biographical approach, a creative writing or artifact biography as an alternative from the ground's eye view. So following a shoe being made, a day in the life, exploring the town, repair, destruction when it's it ends up in the archaeological record, and then its excavation and display, and reflecting on the shoe being in from and it's a first person, so I am renewed and I am different now, but what I once was, I've learned to accept that fact. So the shoes was coming to terms with its own existence as an artifact in a museum collection. And Emmy Wellborn, who's going to join us as co-editor, critiqued the display of the Roman dead, looking at the Castle Street skeleton. And she created a storybook as an alternative, which is a bit faint for a display here, but I've tried to amp the contrast. And again, this is not supposed to be a final product, but she's trying to sort of giving you that skeleton telling its story of the person and its life through to their death in tragic circumstances. So you have a storybook of a skeleton. So these are the students' own designs and ideas, and I think what they bring to us is the potential to use this as an opportunity to do something I vowed I wouldn't do, which is another edited book, but to do an open access project with Caroline, and Emmy suggested it. Are you going to do another book? And I went, oh, really? Yes. If you're so we're going to do 3 components. We're going to include selected student art and reflective essays, the work they did, edited for publication, and that's a choice. They don't have to do that. They've opted to do that. Some of them, about 8 of them, I think. We're having interviews with artists, authors, and archaeological illustrators, reflecting on their practice and experience. And we've got some people who've worked on projects again that we saw yesterday. So we've got some big names in Roman art work and archaeological illustrators. I don't want to name names until the project's a little bit further on, but I think that will be a useful resource. And chapters by academics, heritage professionals, public archaeologists on that interface, the challenges of working with art and archaeology. But what are the implications specifically for Roman finds? Well, as you can see, because we did this at the Grosvenor Museum, and we worked with the rich Roman collections here, and it's all about Chester, not all about Chester, but it'll be focused on Chester, this obviously has implications for Roman finds as well as other areas. So it brings together the experienced and new voices, and therefore fresh perspectives on art and archaeology, we hope. This is my own book review before I've finished writing it. It's fostering new dialogues between academics, practitioners and the public on archaeology, we hope. We're going to be focusing on critiquing the established and emergent practices and identifying new ways of reaching and educating audiences. And particularly, we are going to keep that critique of AI as part of the work, because while one of the students focused specifically on that issue, it was such an important way in which the project developed. We want to make sure that the potentials as well as the pitfalls, so we're not going to take a single view on this, but because this is such now an important part of our world now, we have to not necessarily embrace it, but we have to critique it and keep those challenges moving forward. So hopefully that will be represented in this project too. So thank you for your attention. I hope that links into some of the other things we've heard today, and I'm looking forward to working with Caroline and Emmy and the rest of the students and the other contributors as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. Are there any questions? Barbara?
Thank you for that. That was really interesting. I think it's a great program. When you're working with the students, are you having them actually talk to professional archaeologists that might work, professional artists that might work within the heritage sphere?
Sorry, just to repeat for the camera, are the students working with professional artists that work within the heritage sphere?
I would have loved to have done that I'm going to be honest and say no. So I would have wanted to, and I've long had a vision of getting artists in to work as a collaborative, and that would be an idea for a future. And we've long identified that, but the funding issues, the time tabling issues have been such a nightmare as over the recent years. We've moved to a whole new academic framework for this year. That year, when the run up, it simply wasn't possible. But that will be. Frankly, that is the way we should be going forward. What we did do, though, is we linked students up who had particular questions to ask, here's a person you can contact. So Charlie was in contact with English Heritage to secure permission to use the Ivan Lapper image, which is still under copyright with English Heritage, but also we put him in touch with people at Roxeter, and he had a lot of initiative. But that's where we can only manage it so far, and so part of the thing about dealing with final year students with their dissertations or otherwise is they're having to take their initiative. We can't hold their hand through the whole thing. We set up the structure, and there was a lot of sort of shocked faces. You go, now it's up to you. They go, what do we do now? Well, so it's about, I'm afraid that is part of the game, is we make the connections for them, and if they follow it up, there will be there to back them up. But really, we should in future perhaps bring in artists to help them.
Arty-ology and climate change, which is a 3-year project. So there's a further conversation to be had.
Oh, fantastic. That's great.
Any further questions?
Sorry if I've missed a point that's already been made, but this is something that occurred to me, particularly with regard to the Castle Street skeleton. And I raise this because first of all, I was on the site during that excavation, and also edited the report which put forward the interpretation of how that poor chap ended up down the well. So if you take your public art as a form of interpretation of archaeological discoveries, is one issue that you raise with the students, trying to communicate the inevitable ambiguities and uncertainties of the discoveries.
That was a question regarding communicating the inevitable ambiguity of the discovery to the students.
I think this is a bigger challenge, Peter, and I feel that we are, not individually, but as a collective, we are allergic to just presenting the public with, well, it could have been this, it could have been that. And I've just been, for the first time in my career, for some weird reason, a couple of journalists have been in touch this year asking about new publications by other people. And again, I find that at that level, even when it's like out there as a big viral story, why didn't they just say, well, we don't know, it could be this or that, and have artists give a couple of options? And actually, that was something I kept hammering home to the students, but none of them picked it up and did a sort of, I don't know, visualizations as alternatives, which I think are so empowering for the public and help draw them into that process. I don't think it should be seen as a threatening thing to say, well, the villa could have looked like this, or it could have looked like this, or the potsherd could have been used in this way, or as a vessel, or this way, or the body could have been a murder victim, or something else. So I really wish they had. Yeah, I think that was an unfinished business for the students and me, I think, yeah.